Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, thank you. What a great welcome. And let me tell you, just coming in here this morning and sitting through some of the sessions, there is really excitement in the air, and it's just palpable. Well, I want to say good afternoon to all of you again, and welcome to this session where we are focusing on successful approaches to the potential donor family, effective requesting. And as the Secretary said, with over 84,000 individuals on the waiting list right now and 17 people dying every day, we've got an imperative. It's not a choice, it's an imperative. Process is important, but is only the mechanism for us to achieve our goal. And that goal is to increase the number of successful transplants and people who are living because of those transplants. You know, we can discuss the data until we're blue in the face, but it's important. But in order to, again, drive home how much what you do every day can make that life or death difference, let me try to personalize once again what you do and put that human face on this issue and how what you do can make that difference. Yes, it is a human issue with human impact, but in many, many different ways. Consider two scenarios. You're driving back home from a day of sightseeing with visiting relatives and your pager goes off. You call your office and your assistant informs you that there's been a terrible automobile accident involving your wife. You immediately turn and head to the hospital. A nurse ombudsman meets you as soon as you walk into the emergency room and you identify yourself to the clerk. She escorts you to a small, quiet room off to the side. The lighting is soft, the chairs are comfortable, and right now, you need both. She informs you that your wife has been severely injured. There's been head trauma. The ER team is working on her. Surgery and neurosurgery are involved. Ominous. She offers you coffee, access to a telephone, invites you to remain in the room, assuring you that she will keep you informed. She returns periodically to advise you of what's happening. It's not good. The trauma surgeon stops in. The team has stabilized vital functions, but there's been severe head trauma. The neurosurgeon is with your wife. A chaplain arrives and offers comfort. Now the neurosurgeon enters and describes what's happened. Your wife has sustained such severe head injury that while her heart is still beating, she has lost blood flow to the brain. She's dead. The ER staff is cleansing her, and you can see her very shortly. The doctor remains to answer questions and then leaves you to your grief with your family, who is now gathered. Shortly after, the nurse ombudsman returns again and escorts you to the trauma room to see your wife, who's been cleaned from her injuries. It's a tragic moment. And as you're leaving her side, the neurosurgeon joins you, walks down the corridor with you, and gently raises the question of what you would like to do. His question jogs your memory of an earlier discussion years before between you and your wife. You each had decided to be organ donors on your deaths and had discussed this with each other. What would you do now? Consider a second scenario. You're relaxing at home after dinner. The phone rings. It's a hospital. Your 22-year-old daughter has been struck by a car and is being medevaced by a helicopter to a nearby trauma center. She'll arrive in about 20 minutes. You drive as carefully as you can and you're shocked to the trauma center, which is about 15 minutes away. You arrive at the ER and you go to the clerk's desk. Without looking up at you, she states, "I don't have any information about any young woman arriving by any helicopter." Shortly after, an ER nurse comes out and says, "There's a Jane Doe arriving, but I don't know if it's your daughter." You have to insist on someplace quiet to wait, not the busy and noisy ER waiting room. She offers the police squad room, where there are 3 office desks, metal chairs, and a phone. After uncountable minutes, you sense the beat of the helicopter blades. You step out to find out if this is your daughter. Nobody knows. Finally, an ER physician responds and states that a young woman has arrived with little information. The ER team is working on her. You push your way in. You determine that the patient is, in fact, your daughter, and you then retreat in your shock to the police squad room to leave the professionals to do their job to try to save your loved one. Your daughter's had severe head trauma. She's transferred to the ICU. You ask the ICU staff for access to a phone to call the rest of your family. The staff point you to the payphone in the middle of the busy hallway next to the elevator. Of course, you don't have any change for the phone. The staff are continuing to work on your daughter, and after sitting in the large open ICU visiting room with the soap opera du jour blaring on the TV for everyone to hear and see, a clerk finally shows you to a small, quiet room off the ICU where you could wait. The staff provides you access to your daughter despite the limited visiting hours, and because of the trauma, her brain is swelling. There's little more than neurosurgeons can do. You wait and you watch the intracranial pressure rise. You have to ask, is there pastoral assistance? The staff say, but it's after hours. Can't you wait until tomorrow morning when the staff chaplain will be on duty? No, you insist. You really would like to have assistance now. And after a couple of hours, the on-call chaplain arrives. The ICP has now risen to critical and terminal levels. Death is inevitable. Your daughter's mother arrives after an exhausting 16-hour flight. Less than 2 hours later, the neurosurgeon in the middle of the ICU informs her that it's time to declare your daughter dead. He tells her that he's been keeping her alive until she arrived. Later, after a brain flow study has been done, the neurosurgeon again approaches, obviously prepared to announce the results to you and your family in the middle of the ICU. You have to insist on moving to the small room for privacy. He impatiently informs you that your daughter's brain flow studies confirm her death. When her mother asks him to show her the clinical signs of death at the bedside, he states, it's not necessary. The brain flow study confirms she's dead. Nevertheless, he trounces off as if leading a pack of medical students and residents on rounds and proceeds to conduct the bedside evaluation of brain function. Yes, it's consistent with brain death. He seems irritated at this unnecessary interruption of his day, and he leaves. When the trauma fellow is called to provide the second finding of death, he states over the phone to the staff, it's not necessary. He doesn't need to see the patient since he accepts the neurosurgeon's determination. He'll just sign off on the chart. He argues, I'm too busy to talk with the family. I have trauma to take care of. When he finally arrives in a flash of green scrubs and white lab coat, he repeats the neurological evaluation with obvious annoyance. He has other trauma to take care of. He has lives to save. Your daughter is dead. Early on, realizing that your daughter might be an organ donor, you had asked that your local OPO be called. They now approach. What would you do now? Well, these two scenarios, with some editorial license, but not a lot, actually happened. They happened to the same person. They both happened to me and to my family. My wife and daughter died in separate automobile accidents a few years apart. I don't know how you see this, but in the first instance, we, the family, felt supported and comforted in our grief. And at the point of being asked whether we wanted to donate my wife's organs and tissues, we were inclined and ready to do so. In the second instance, we had already had the positive experience of donating our loved one's organs once before, and we were favorably inclined. But as our time in the hospital went on, and we interacted with staff, and we became increasingly negative to the system and its people and the way that we felt they were treating us. Perhaps it was us who were getting more frustrated and angrier in our grief, but perhaps it was not. Perhaps it was, in fact, the natural and normal attitudes and behavior of the staff and the rest of the institutional environment, probably unintentional and totally transparent in their efforts to address the first trauma, to attempt to save my daughter's life. And in the second scenario, I would guess, were we not already so strongly predisposed, we would have had a really choice reply in response to a request for organ donation. Well, listening to some of the titters in the audience, I know that we all know of these and of other scenarios, those we've heard of, those we've actually seen, and perhaps those we may have already been active participants in. These two scenarios are real. We all know that they happen every single day. And during the several days that we spent in the ICU until my daughter died, we observed more of the same. Ours was not an isolated experience. A young Hispanic workman was thrown out of the back end of a pickup truck. His wife was there. They could not speak English. On the pager, is there a translator who can speak Spanish? And guess who was a translator? The cleaning crew. Thank you very much. With all the effort we pour into raising organ donor awareness, it ultimately comes down to this moment of truth, this moment of decision, this moment when we approach the family to ask for organ donation. And we can just about toss everything down the drain if we don't do a good job in this peri-donation environment in better preparing the family for this moment by treating them with dignity and with respect. Thank you. If in the second case we had reacted with our emotions rather than with our heads, several people who could have been saved through the miracle of donation and transplantation would still be on that waiting list. Or even worse, they would be dead, unsuccessfully having waited for that organ that never appeared. My point is that in your everyday efforts at saving lives, never forget that there are several patients, not only the ones lying in the emergency room or in the ICU bed, but also those who are standing around that bed, the family and the loved ones, and that all the patients need care. So that if you can't save the life of the patient, when you and the OPO approach the grieving survivors to ask for a donation, they will be better prepared to consider saying yes. And in doing so, they and you can help save and improve the lives of so many others. Because of a family 12 years ago that said yes to donation, many people from Pennsylvania to Florida benefited. My wife, Donnelly, was once again simply an ordinary person who accomplished extraordinary things, as do all organ donors. And we, the family, felt that sense of comfort in our grief, that out of our tragedy some good might result. And a couple of years later, that same family agreed again to donate, despite the negative environment we felt. And again, people from New York to Florida received the gift of life. This is truly a human issue with human impact in many different ways. Without this gift of life, a decision to donate, these people would have waited, and several would be dead rather than enjoying a renewed life. You can make a difference. As you work to save a life, don't forget the family, because they will not forget the way that you treat them. And if it comes to the point of requesting donation, they will remember what they saw, what they heard, and how they were treated. Every day somebody dies who could be an organ donor. Through your efforts, donation becomes possible and transplantation becomes a reality. As Dennis said, we want to talk about the positives. We want to talk about responsibilities. We want to talk about what we can do, not what we can't do. We want to tell the good versus the bad stories. We want to move forward. We want to have action rather than waiting and wishing. Every one of us can help make this difference. Every one of us can help others share life and help others donate life. And you know, my closing comment is always, because that truly is the right thing to do.